Now, get ready to talk hockey. Streaming from the Oilers Live studio. Subscribe or follow today.
Hey, it's Michael here for another edition of Oilers Live Tuesday. Now we've got no more Oilers to talk about. There is still NHL going on, but sadly, the Oilers are no longer in the playoffs. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk to probably one of my favorite guests that I've had on over the last few years of doing the Oilers Live podcast. It's Dale Sheehan, and Dale is a director for sport integrity with Interpol, former RCMP, author on the subject of sports integrity, among many other things, which I seem to learn by the minute every time I talk to him, whether it's off air or on air. And just to finish the introduction, Dale and I had formerly, when I had him on the podcast, we had discussed integrity in sports with trying to get a little bit of a lean into hockey, which we'll do again tonight. And there's some subjects we'll touch on tonight. But you're going to leave tonight, hopefully surprised, or when you listen to the podcast, you're going to be surprised on exactly what sports integrity means. Maybe a little bit surprised on the ways that the integrity of sport can be compromised, which is probably where I was most surprised the last time we spoke. And hopefully you learned something. And if you're on YouTube and you're checking us out at youtube.ca/heavyhockey, you can join in the chat tonight, and we'll get to some of those questions as we go. All of that, and thank you, Dale, for joining me.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Michael, and I just moved out west and had the sincere pleasure of watching almost every Oilers game this year, and have to say I'm completely devastated. They're a team of destiny that's just not getting there, but it's just spectacular hockey. What can you say? Yeah.
There is no doubt. Maybe sometime I'll have to get you on the air just to talk about Oilers hockey rather than sports integrity. But nonetheless, we don't have any Oilers hockey to really talk about. Fixed and working for everyone.
How's that? I'm back.
That is much better. at least for now. Everything points to us having good audio, but for some reason it's not. But right now it sounds good. So we'll carry this on. And maybe just to kind of touch on a few key points, if anybody had trouble hearing them. The CBC. Maybe offsetting some of their responsibility back onto Rogers for the gambling ads after some complaints have come in that indicated, kids are watching their gambling heroes their heroes on TV amongst all these gambling ads. In fact, maybe even suggesting that their heroes are gamblers in the process. If you think about the Wayne Gretzky advertisements that are out there. Specifically, that, and this, we'll have to talk about this because this was something I learned from you, which was the black market betting specifically, and how Bill, and let's be clear here, Dale mentioned it. He's not, anti-gambling. In fact. But there are some obligations in terms of ethics and maybe morality that we should, consider. And so, the Bill C-218 allowed for single sports betting in Canada, which was actually a positive thing if you consider the black market gambling, right? That Canadians now had a legal form of gambling that they could turn to. And I believe, Dale, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of what, in some of the other leagues where there was the question of match fixing, a lot of that was occurring through the black market, right? Would that be safe to say? Or was there some in the legalized gambling arena?
Well, it would be a blend of the two, Michael. Of course, a lot of it was the black market. The black market led to serious debt, extortion, high inflation, high interest rates on loans. You've seen all of the loan shark movies, etc. But anywhere that a bet is placed, be it the black market or the legal market, is affected by an attempt at match fixing, and it's match manipulation, because it's not just as we spoke last time, it's not just the outcome of the game anymore. Vegas is doing live betting on the bottom of your screen right now as to who will touch the puck next, who will hit the goalpost first. And when you start to get into those issues, we've seen cases where people have been approached and said, the first time that you get a hold of the soccer ball, the football, kick it out of bounds, and we'll give you $50,000, and just accidentally kick it out of bounds. It's not going to affect the outcome of the game. It's not going to affect your integrity, but then you're locked in. And once you're locked in, they have you. And not to put it in the same comparison, but I think it's important. If you look at the Russians, for example, in the NHL, that are saying that they fear for their life and they fear for the life of their family back in Russia if they wear a gay pride jersey during a warm-up, you can see the influence outside of the country where families are threatened. And this is one example. If the Russians are saying this for gay pride jerseys, how do we know that there's not other players being affected with threats from family, cousins, uncles, etc.? And I think that comparison is truly important, because it's nothing to do with betting in this case, but it has to do with the fact that there are external or perceived, accurate or not, external threats. You look at what Evander Kane went through in a domestic situation where he was accused of gambling and betting on games, and Evander was totally vindicated and all of that. But look at the headlines that made for the NHL. Look at the negative headlines that was in the news for a long, long time. And in all fairness to Evander Kane, he's been not acquitted because he wasn't charged, but he's been completely vindicated. Yet everywhere he goes, you see signs in the arena, you want to bet, and they're taking shots at him and insults. And it just shows you that kind of pressure is real. And, the NHL had to realize that when that happened and they had to conduct that investigation, there were a lot of people that assumed that Evander was guilty before any process was done. And the negative part of that is it affects that stereotype across the league back to youth. So I think, as I said, in terms of match manipulation, the NHL is undoubtedly the hardest of the big four to actively fix or manipulate, because it's such a fast-paced game. It's such a hard game. You almost need to have more than one person involved. But that said, they're also seen as being the sport that is the least proactive in this area. And I always use the analogy that when the Riders had the 13th man on the field and they lost the Grey Cup, what happened if the next day they found out that 13th player was paid $100,000 to run onto the field?
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's like an insurance clause. Entities aren't investing in as much as they should in prevention, education, and training because it hasn't affected them. But that's the danger. Now, in Canada, when you look at the controversy surrounding the sexual assault investigations and the moral, ethical alleged behavior and the cause for these investigations that basically flipped Hockey Canada, one of our proudest institutions for many Canadians, on its head. And, it wasn't necessarily Hockey Canada that followed up with proactive, but the IIHF, starting in 2022, out of the 10 teams that play, there's mandatory integrity workshops. And for every single player, coach, and referee for every world championship now in the IIHF, regardless. And that covers anti-doping, competition manipulation, abuse, harassment, and ethical conduct. So the IIHF is taking some pretty proactive steps. Now we can clearly see why they've gone in that manner. But there are other countries, like Finland, where in youth hockey this year they've trained 150. They've done 150 workshops, over 950 players, 75 coaches, 30 referees. This is for youth. So some of these countries they've really caught on, and they're into it now. And when youth, who are the most easily to convince or see something, they're actively engaged in that. They're setting standards in Europe. That now they're finding one of the big match manipulations is esport. And the major investigations in the videos are under scrutiny for match fixing. And I go back to where there is money, so too there is the opportunity for organized crime. As simple as that. And I do think that Canada has a long way to go on that. And with the gambling ads now, there's a whole slew of issues that comes with it. Mental health, addiction. And at some point in time, you would have to ask, why are cigarettes banned if that's an addiction? And yet gambling has just steamrolled in. I want to start the phrase, and maybe we can start it through your following. Canada has a gambling washing problem. You've heard of sports washing, when Saudi Arabia creating Live Golf. Well, Canada has a gambling washing addiction, where we're completely inundated with it, whether we want to be or not, regardless of youth, addicts, mental health issues, it's there. If you want to watch sports now, you have no choice. And I think the polls that are showing strong disagreement from right across the country with Canadians. And, you can't fault the broadcasters. They've gone through a couple of difficult years with COVID, and they will follow the money. But you're not seeing the commercials that we used to see, even in any proportion. It's 90% gambling and addiction.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks to, one thing, which is, I'm always, and I hate to say his name, but Trump always said if everybody could build a casino in their backyard, everybody would be rich. And it's true, gambling is a profitable business, and no more apparent than the fact that they can buy up all of these advertisements. And, even for our Heavy Hockey Network, we get approached to, do gambling advertising and the like. And we had considered it for a very short period because the money is there. And so, clearly somebody's making some money, and then it does bring up a whole host of other challenges. I'm kind of curious, with all of this, talking about maybe the NHL being one of the least proactive. I get the sense, and maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that it's not even necessary. Maybe the NHL is the least proactive of all the sports, but North America in general is maybe the least proactive of all of the regions globally when it comes to this. Is this the case of, much like I always say I have a job that pays the podcasting bills. I'm in cybersecurity, but until there's a breach at an organization, they, won't invest in cybersecurity. Is that what we need to see? Do we need to see like a massive game manipulation or match fixing that will happen in North America before it becomes a real issue here? Or is it, or am I just maybe not, maybe it is a real issue here and I'm just not hearing about it?
So that's where we can start. I fully agree. As I said earlier, it's an insurance policy, and if I don't want to take out collision on my car, that's my choice. But there are weekly situations that are arising in the United States and in Canada, and I'll send you some of them. Coaches are being fired for match fixing. Coaches are being fired for manipulation. It's not as much of a headline, understandably, as the extensive amount of sexual abuse and sexual assaults.
Yeah.
But it is there, and you will see. There are players, and as leagues are expanding internationally, there's even more of a need for scrutiny. And I go back, and I'm not targeting Russia in any means whatsoever, but if you look at that issue about the threats from outside of this country, if they wore a sweater, their life was in danger, their families' lives was in peril. It shows that the possibility is there. And for people that say it's impossible to fix a game in hockey, I disagree. And I use the analogy you have two goaltenders from Blakistan, and the first goaltender lets in 4 goals in the first period, and he gets yanked. And they put in the second goaltender, and the goaltender doesn't let in any, or 1 or 2, and they lose the game 5-4. But the main point is the damage was done with the 4 goals. And so it is possible. And I think, you go back to Pete Rose still being denied the Hall of Fame, baseball, when you've seen, quite frankly, a lot worse since then, and including steroids and doping. But I do believe something will happen. Canada, Mexico, and the United States are hosting the next World Cup. And that is one of the major targets for match manipulation. Not so much particularly at the World Cup, because the stakes are so high profile, but going through that process. It's the leagues that are dropping down below now. In Canada, people are betting on high school hockey games now. They're betting on university. So it's dropped below betting on the Habs against the Leafs. And if you don't have those safeguards in place, not just for a situation where you find someone thinking about it. So I just did an investigation in a country where I just got back, as a matter of fact. And what happened was the last game was meaningless for a football club, and they sat their 4 best players. And monitoring the betting spiked before the game, and the turnout didn't turn out as you would assume. They did lose the game, but the question was the tanking issue. Is tanking match manipulation? So I took a little bit of a beating on Twitter when I commented on Arizona sitting their star potential trade defenseman for 10 games before the trade line, 10 games before the trade deadline. And this is an impact player. So if you're betting on that game, is that an accurate bet, or do you take that into consideration because they're not fielding their best hockey team, and the gray area is where coaches say, "I don't want them to get injured. It's a meaningless game. What if they get injured before the trade deadline?" But the severe danger to any credibility in the league is the issue of Connor Bedard.
Yeah.
And no team's going to come out directly and say, I hope we lost, but there were a few teams that were probably pretty upset that the players pulled a win through and got out of that bracket. But then you go look at the NBA, where they were just fined millions of dollars for tanking. So you can see the difference in how the leagues treat it. Gary Bettman says if and when he thinks tanking is an issue, they'll look at that. But just because you have a lottery system introduced at the bottom doesn't mean anything. It's you still have the odds of winning, but most importantly, the paying fan is deprived of seeing the star players that they want to go see. So there's many different ways and many different meanings of match manipulation. And then, of course, you've got the ethic issue of the Blackhawks winning at the conclusion of a huge scandal and a cover-up. So ethics and integrity in what would have been is supposed to be a generational draft was tainted because of a scandal. And I think that the leagues have gotten better, but I just think, that's a big problem in Africa in soccer, but it's not here. It's not in North America, and it's not relevant. But I can assure you, there are football players in Canada, hockey players, baseball players that are in debt, that are pressured by family, that come from different countries, come from different provinces. Everybody has some baggage, and it needs to be monitored. There are still leagues in Canada that are not monitoring betting. They have no idea how much is bet on a game or a period or an outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably high target, right? For I mean, why would you go after an NHL game where everybody's watching when you could bet on a high school hockey game, which nobody's maybe paying attention. I hadn't considered that. Back to the NHL, the other thing that I hadn't really, I mean, we kind of accept as fans is this tanking for the for the spot. We talk about it, we laugh about it, we don't really, I think, get up in arms about it that much, but the reality is we should, because it's if as you say, I mean, if at any point the integrity of the game is lost, if you're not actually going for a win, if you're sitting your best players, the 10 games of Chikrin sitting out is a prime example. It just happens to be on a Bedard year, right? Is that a coincidence? I mean, not likely, right? I mean, it could have been one game, like most players sit out, and only when the trade is imminent, right?
And that's that gray area that's being completely ignored, not by the NBA. If the NBA calls it, and I was very impressed with that, the fine and the basic case law that they set in issuing that fine. But if you're spending a couple $100, $500 or $1,000 with the family to go to a hockey game, and you see Connor McDavid sitting for the last 5 games because it doesn't mean anything, and they want to face a lower team in the playoffs, hypothetically, you're upset as a paying person, first of all, but also I think it's a very difficult area to prove. A coach will tell you, I have every right to rest my players for the playoffs. A coach will tell you undisclosed injuries. The NHL has zero policy on injury disclosure
Mm-hmm.
compared to other leagues. So Michael's not feeling well today. Uh, you saw, I don't know if you saw last night, the game where the coach basically
Oh,
said
Barkov, yeah.
he, he would play, but he had to go to a bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
So a bit of humor in that. But the point is, um, the integrity of the game is what is critical. And for those that are in the business of selling advertising and um, and promoting safe sport, they also have to be in the business of the morals and ethics of that. It will take one situation, and there have been some. As I said, you have to feel for Kane, um, regardless of the situation of what happened. Um, uh, you have to feel for him going through that personally. That can't be easy. Uh, but you look at what the league went through for that, and it's just under investigation, can't talk. So I give full credit to the IIHF for implementing this integrity. I think Canada Hockey um, will do it. My fear is it'll be about morals and ethics and sexual abuse, and not the all-encompassing issue of integrity and role models, etc. So, I can pretty well assure you that there will be a second commercial with Connor and Wayne in a Zamboni race. And we might not ever know who's going to win it, but I can pretty much guarantee you can bet on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true.
And we laugh at it, but you look at some star athletes sitting there with comedians. They're all role models and heroes, and looking at, oh, look at that, they give me a $200 credit when I make my first bet. Oh, that was fast. So that addiction right there
Mhm.
is they're giving you money to get you. They're not in there for the love of sport.
No.
Again, they're in it to make money. Um, and I recall in the days in the RCMP, the tobacco industry funded policing positions to combat illegal tobacco. And, given staff shortages, the police forces across the country were ecstatic because we got investigators to go out and combat illegal tobacco. So what happened when we shut down the illegal tobacco? They go buy the tobacco from the people that are selling it legally.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the gambling industry. The gambling industry has every desire to invest to shut down the black market. Why? So they get the money and they get the profit. Now, I'm sure some of them have a moral and social conscience uh, and realize that the black market is very dangerous and it's organized crime, etc. But let's face it, as we've seen with the swamping of commercials, it is about the money. And people can say whatever they want. You will never convince me that it's anything more than that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a strong profit motive, no doubt. And if you can give away free, quote unquote, free money, there's got to be something in it
Yeah.
for them, especially given the amount of the money that they're, willingly providing as free credit to bet with. And I hadn't considered the fact even that they had banned, tobacco and alcohol ads for, and comparing it to gambling, which is maybe even the worst of the three addictions in terms of ruining families and households. So
Well,
kind of, yeah,
it's a good point, Michael. If I go out and buy cigarettes and I smoke on my own, I'm harming my health.
yeah,
And there's the difference. When I go out with a gambling addiction or a drinking addiction, I harm others. When I go out with a gambling addiction, um, you're talking, for most cases, losing everything you own, losing everything your family owns, and stealing from employers, committing crime, anything you can do to support that addiction. And part of that is, I mean, look at what you have to go through to buy a pack of cigarettes at a gas station. They have to
Yeah.
open Fort Knox now with the most descriptive advertising that I've ever seen. And we've taken such a strong stance on that. But I go back to the government is also in the building. The Ontario Lotto
Yeah.
Commission, they're in the business of gambling. It's a high income area, and part of those proceeds, in my mind, from these gambling corporations now, should be going into mental health services, addiction services, um, into enforcement. Uh, they say that they have as much desire as anybody else to protect the integrity of sport, and I sincerely believe that because um, they want people to bet with confidence that the game is played in a fair way.
Yeah.
But when something is sponsored by ilostmymortgage.com, you have to question whether that's the ethical thing to do when children are sitting there watching their heroes. Um, in today's age of technology, where everything is accessible on a phone, uh, you really have to question how long the government will keep this going.
Yeah. So something, something you had talked about that also, I mean, as I said before, the last time I left with way more questions. I feel like this time it's going to be the same thing. I hadn't considered, again, not picking on the Russians, but the Russian influence where they did talk about, whether it was the gay pride jersey or, just people defending Ovechkin for his picture with Putin, even, right? That they were able to be manipulated over continents just by the risk of their families being put at risk, right? And so you'd have to think that would extend to something as simple as we're talking about prop bets, as game manipulation, or like maybe taking a hooking penalty or something midway through the game, or something like that. Like that kind of thing can happen. Or you talk about the 13th man with the Riders. What stops you from being that extra guy hopping out on the ice by accident? At the end of a game, or something like that. So the ability to at least have some small outcome on the game is there, but I had not considered the fact, that some of these there are different ways to motivate people,
Well,
and
and
that's clearly one of them.
it's not just the Russians. If you go
Yeah,
into the sport of boxing, um, and the mafia and organized crime and fixing boxing matches goes back century. So it's in any sport. Anybody can be approached at any time, and I think if you start off with that broad scale of um, this could happen to you, even as a referee. Just
yeah,
make sure you call a penalty on Michael in the first 5 minutes of the game, and it won't matter. It won't affect the outcome of the game. And you do scenarios in these workshops, and you have 8 referees at a table, and you give them different scenarios. And one of them says it's 3 minutes before kickoff, and you just got a phone call saying if you don't do A, B, C, D, your wife and child will be harmed, and we have them right now, and they're just about to kick off. What would you do?
I
And
mean,
you'd
you
be
do what
shocked.
they asked.
You'd be
Yeah,
shocked at the different answers. Some
yeah,
I write to police. Some say I guess it's my family, and
yeah,
so, but it's not. It's about generating that discussion and putting those policies and procedures in place. And the ethics, the prevention, education, and training component is essential. I mean, in fairness, referees don't think like that, nor would you expect them to.
yeah,
But when you put those thoughts in their head, sometimes it might not happen here. It's happening around the world, and it's only a matter of time. And when the World Cup comes here, they come with international conglomerates of staff and teams and referees. Um, so, it really is a situation, I think, that Canada has to get out ahead of. And I do think, and I'm not crying wolf because, as I said, I want it very clear to your listeners, I'm not anti-gambling. I love betting formally and informally on whatever it might be. But if you ever told me that Marty McSorley had that illegal stick and the penalty was called in Game 6 against the Montreal Canadiens, and the Canadiens didn't deserve to win that Stanley Cup, I mean, you'd be devastated. And you can give all of those examples that you want, but um, the reality is the pressure on athletes now starts in high school.
Hmm.
You're identifying athletes like Connor Bedard at 13, 14 years old saying, this is the future of the NHL. And what type um, of preventative educational components are taking place? Um, why are we waiting for the IIHF to do this mandatory training at the World Championships?
Yeah. Yeah, and if I recall, I remember you saying that in some instances there are players that are groomed, whether it's by talking to their family from the time they're 13, or the first time they're recognized as having potential to play in professional sports.
You,
With the age of social influence and that, I mean, we knew about Connor Bedard long before, we knew he was going to be an NHLer. So what would stop somebody from talking to him and his family at that point in time?
I mean, there's a lot of hypotheticals, and I can only use comparison in other leagues. Um, but what if the father of a superstar potential is offered $10 million to refuse to report to that team that drafted him?
Yeah.
A la Eric Lindros, for example, was different reasons, but that was a superstar who refused to report. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there are cases around the world where it's been discovered that that was the reason, is of payoffs to parents or others. And then the team that it's sport is a multi-trillion-dollar business right now, and the profit is no longer. Players don't get paid in the Stanley Cup playoffs. They don't get paid, so their salary stops when the season ends, because otherwise it wouldn't be fair. That now they get a bonus per round, a small bonus, which is nothing compared to the salary, but they're playing for the Stanley Cup. They're not playing for money any longer. And I think what's important is um, you can you can play all year and run up stats and do the best that you can. But if it's found out and it comes out that something was done in error, um, the steroid area era of baseball is still why why are people that have home run records in the Hall of Fame and Pete Rose isn't?
Yeah.
So where do you draw that line? And I think it sends a very confusing message to youth, and it sends a really confusing message to everybody. But I do believe um, that it's minor hockey, Canada hockey. You will see for sure mandatory workshops and training in Hockey Canada. Um, but I don't think that the focus will be on match manipulation as much as it should be.
Yeah, as it should be.
If you need to take 2 days to do it, then take the 2 days and do what the IIHF is doing.
Yeah. Yeah. All very kind of key points. We'll start to wind down here, and maybe I remember, if I recall, right about the time we last spoke, there was a case in Russia of some match manipulation in hockey. Have there been any other cases, whether at any level, that you can recall in the past couple of years?
In the past couple of years, there have been some. They have not been that high profile. Um, Interestingly enough, there's been referees more than players themselves, and that's why it's important to make this all inclusive. This is everybody: players, coaches, managers, referees, trainers, etc. Um, and the league, the NHL, has an obligation. At what point in time do you call it in Arizona? At what point in time do you say, listen, is there a trade on the table? Is he hurt? Why isn't he playing? The stakes are multi-million-dollar stakes. Now, maybe Arizona sincerely wanted, didn't want him to get hurt and thus didn't play him. Um, but you sure need rules and processes because the integrity of the NHL is bigger than Arizona or a draft pick, and very difficult to prove. You can, whatever injury it might be. So there are cases in hockey. Not again, it's a harder game to to do, but in Eastern Europe, there are cases that continue to arise, and as hockey is now an international conglomerate where drafting and games are being played overseas, it's even more important than ever for the NHL to take this on and follow the steps of the IIHF and especially the European Union. Frankly, the European Union, I mean, they, April 15th is an annual sport integrity day. They shame the rest of the world with the legislation that they pass, with the laws, with the promotion, with the prevention, the education and training. They shame the world. So it's time for North America and Canada to step up.
Yeah. What and maybe this is the last of the questions for tonight as we wind down. Do you think the NHL or maybe Canadian or North American hockey in general is at risk or due for an event of magnitude that would, hit the news, that would sort of rock, or like, is it going to happen, or do you think prior to that there's enough out there that they'll figure it out? Like, if you were to put the weather vane out today,
I, I would
where
hope.
do you think we're
I would
headed?
hope not. I would hope not. If if there's an issue that could occur in the NHL, I believe that it would be a substance abuse gambling type of issue. Not necessarily um, throwing a game, but a gambling, addiction, substance abuse issue that would affect the integrity of the game, or the perception of the integrity of the game. I think that the NHL has done a lot of work in that area, but I go back to, it just can't be a workshop at the beginning of the year and away you go. And it starts with leadership. And I commend the NBA. They called tanking a form of match manipulation.
Yeah.
And when you start taking away people's drafts and teams' draft picks, and you start setting precedents, the NHL has a lot to learn.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. So since the last time we spoke, I've changed the format up a little bit. I will say my last words right now, but I've always thought I would give my guests the last word, so I'll give you the last word right away. And when you're done, just say goodnight, and I'll draw the drapes and say goodnight to everybody. I want to thank everybody for tuning in again. As always, I think this is a really important topic, both for hockey and for sport in general. I do ask Dale that as you say the last word tonight, you let people know what they can do to assist, because I think not just is it important at the NHL level, it's probably equally important as you're raising children in sport and starting to understand any of the things that happen. Obviously, our kids grow up to be adults, and whether they're lucky enough to play in professional sport, they're probably playing in sport all the way through to high school, et cetera. And so these things happen at all levels. Lots to think about. I mean, you gave me lots to think about last time, even more to think about this time. It's an area that probably, I would say, and you might tell me I'm wrong, but I haven't heard much discussion on it in general, whether it's podcasts or news or otherwise, and probably not enough. One thing, this was informal conversations you and I have had over the last couple of years, but just talking about the smelling salts that they use. I mean, here's they celebrate it on Sportsnet, and it's really a drug that the players are using, which I think, if I'm not if I'm correct, has really little to no effect on their performance at all. But we're possibly encouraging our young kids growing up that they can find a legal performance enhancing drug if they can, if they can get it. And I believe smelling salts is a big market out there for that now too, and in fact, and you can buy them probably on Amazon if you want. So lots to think about. I'm glad to have you on, and hopefully we get you on a little bit sooner. And I do hope that the way that the NHL looks at this and approaches sports integrity becomes a little bit more proactive. My I guess my perception is along the lines of what you had suggested, which is that they're not as proactive as other leagues, and the fact that we talk continuously every year about teams tanking, and we laugh about it, is somewhat disappointing. And I always said, I've said to many people, I want to see the best players in the world play every night that I get a chance. And anytime they sit out without really good reason, to me is a travesty to the game of hockey. There's definitely some ethical thoughts that come to mind when we think about that. So anyway, thank you again, and I'll give you the last word. Just say goodnight, and that's when we'll finish off.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I commend you and your listeners for actively pursuing this. I think that any conversation on this is a good conversation to have. And for your viewers and listeners, take the message forward and think about it. Hockey itself is a wealthy person's game. It's one of the most expensive sports, if not the most, to get into. It's not just a soccer ball and running shoes. And the stakes are very high, and the pressure is starting on youth at a very, very young age. And with the technology that's out there today, and the addictions and the access to everything, I think it's really essential that we protect our children and our youth. They're our future of sport. And I think that if we get the government entities and the organizations and the awareness through people like yourself, we can make a difference. And I think that we just can't stop doing that.